The unlikely encounter that changed everything. The Vera Dominion had ruled the galactic core for over 10,000 cycles. Their fleets, vast and indomitable, had crushed dozens of civilizations beneath the weight of their unrelenting expansion. To the Vera, conquest was not just an act of power, it was a necessity, an instinct woven into the very fabric of their existence. And yet, despite their dominance, there remained a few species scattered across the distant stars that had eluded them, odd, inconsequential creatures unworthy of true consideration. Among them was a species referred to as humans, a minor anomaly, an anomaly that only recently had begun expanding beyond their homeworld, a planet called Earth. Their technology was primitive, their colonies sparse, and yet, something about them had always unsettled the Dominion. It wasn't fear, nor was it respect, just an unexplainable uncertainty, a hesitation that no one could quite put into words. It was said that the Vera High Council had dismissed the humans entirely, branding them as irrelevant and unworthy of integration. The consensus among the ruling elite was simple: humanity was fragile, scattered, and technologically inferior. The very idea that they could pose any threat to the Dominion was laughable. That was the official stance. But Admiral Corvellis had his doubts. Standing aboard the command bridge of his Dread-class flagship, the HFY, Corvellis surveyed the holographic star map before him. The sleek vessel, easily the size of a small moon, hovered in the outermost regions of the Perseus Arm, its weapons primed and shields raised. It was here, among the distant stars, that the Dominion had detected a human presence. A small outpost, barely a blip in the great scheme of things, but an outpost nonetheless. Corvellis had been given one directive: to eliminate them. His orders were simple: sweep the system, leave nothing standing, erase them. And yet, as he gazed out at the cold void beyond, he couldn't shake the unease coiling in his chest. A species so weak should not have lasted this long. A species so scattered should not have continued to expand. Yet, time and time again, the reports had come in. Humans survived. No matter the odds, no matter the conditions, no matter the brutality of the enemy they endured. And endurance, Corvellis knew, was a dangerous thing. A sharp chime rang through the bridge, breaking his thoughts. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Varish, his second in command. "We have completed our scans. There are 2 confirmed human settlements in this sector. One is lightly defended, a civilian hub, factories, housing districts, trade depots. The other is a military installation, small by their standards, but heavily fortified." Corvellis narrowed his gaze. "How many ships?" he asked. "Only 3, Varish replied, his mandibles twitching in amusement. 2 frigates and 1 destroyer. Their defense fleet is pathetic." A low ripple of laughter echoed through the bridge. Several officers exchanged smirks, their confidence bolstered by the sheer absurdity of it all. 3 ships against the full might of the HFY. This wasn't just overkill. This was an execution. And yet, Corvellis remained silent. For the briefest moment, he considered calling off the attack. Not out of mercy. He had no love for humans, nor did he consider them equals, but out of caution. Something didn't feel right. The numbers didn't add up. A colony like this, military-backed, strategically positioned, should have had more. More defenses, more ships, more resistance. And yet, all they had were 3 ships. It was almost as if the humans wanted them to attack. Corvellis let the thought linger before dismissing it with a sharp flick of his mandibles. It didn't matter. "Prepare for orbital bombardment," he ordered, his voice a cold whisper of finality. "Crush their infrastructure. Once their defenses are crippled, deploy ground forces. I want the settlements leveled before the next cycle." The crew responded in unison. Weapons primed, targeting systems locked in. The fate of the human colony was sealed. Or so they thought. The warning that came too late. Just as the HFY prepared to unleash its full fury, a proximity alarm screamed through the command deck. Corvellis snapped his attention toward the display, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "Report," he barked. "A vessel is approaching." Varich shouted, his previous amusement vanishing in an instant. "Unknown class. No transponder ID." Corvellis narrowed his gaze. "A human ship?" "We don't know." Varich's fingers danced across the interface, pulling up the real-time visual. The holographic display flickered, revealing a dark, angular warship emerging from the planet's shadow. It was large, larger than any known human vessel, a ghostly silhouette against the void. The bridge fell into a heavy silence. Corvellis stepped forward, eyes locked onto the ship's unusual structure. Something about it sent a primal sense of unease through his body. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its hull was layered in adaptive plating, shifting like liquid metal. Its engines emitted no visible exhaust, no heat signature, no detectable energy output. It was silent, too silent. Then the ship moved. No warning, no hesitation, just impossible speed. Before anyone could react, it crossed the entire void in seconds, its shadow consuming the Jathal's bow. Corvellis' blood ran cold. "Open fire," he roared. The Dominion warship's turrets spun, discharging a barrage of high-density plasma toward the incoming vessel. They never landed. In an instant, the enemy ship blinked, not away, but through the attack. The plasma dissipated harmlessly, as if space itself had rewritten reality. Then the voices began. A low, distorted hum filled the bridge. Faint, at first, then growing, shifting, twisting into something that sent raw terror coursing through the Admiral's veins. It was laughter. Not mechanical, not artificial. Human laughter, but warped, distorted, echoing. Corvellis barely had time to process the horror before a single transmission crackled through the comms, one that sent a chill through every living soul aboard the Jethal. "You wanted to see what we're capable of. Let's begin." The feed cut, the ship vanished. And then, one by one, the lights on the Jethal went dark. The silence before the storm. The Jethal, pride of the Vera Dominion, stood frozen in space. Admiral Corvellis watched in disbelief as every console, every display, every system aboard his flagship flickered violently before going dark. Not damage, not destroyed. Just off. The hum of the ship's reactors, the ever-present thrum of its enormous power core, had ceased. The bridge, once alight with holograms and control panels, was now consumed by an unnatural void. No blinking lights, no responding systems, only the glow of distant stars and the reflection of the unknown ship looming outside. Corvellis' breath hitched. This was not an EMP, nor was it a standard energy disruption. Those would have been temporary. His ship was built to withstand such attacks, equipped with redundancies designed to reboot instantly. And yet, there was nothing. No alarms, no emergency lighting, no fail-safe reboots. Just emptiness. A deep unease crept through the command bridge. Even Varich, his usually unshakable second-in-command, stood motionless, mandibles twitching in a mixture of uncertainty and fear. "Report," Corvellis barked, voice sharp. No one answered. Then, like the slow inhale of some ancient unseen predator, the lights flickered back on. Not all of them, just enough to cast a dim, eerie glow over the control deck. It was then that Corvellis noticed something far more disturbing. The main viewport. The alien ship was gone. Vanished, as if it had never been there. Corvellis turned sharply to his sensor officer, a young, sharp-eyed officer named Relktor, who had been monitoring the enemy ship's presence. "Where did it go?" the Admiral demanded. Relktor's fingers danced across the console, his eyes darting over the screens. His mandibles twitched. His expression shifted. "Sir," his voice faltered. Corvellis narrowed his gaze. "Speak." Relktor turned slowly, his pale blue eyes wide with something Corvellis rarely saw in his officers. Dread. It's inside, sir. Corvellis felt his blood turn to ice. What? The ship, Relktor whispered. It's inside our hull. That was impossible. The Zathal's hull was reinforced with the finest quantum-forged alloys, its interior deck structures encased in an impenetrable maze of bulkheads and security systems. There was no way a ship could just phase through. And yet, the main control display glitched again. A faint, distorted signal pulsed through the bridge. Then it spoke. A voice. Human. It echoed through the intercom, its tone calm, almost amused. Tell me, Admiral, what does it feel like to be hunted? Corvellis' mandibles clenched. He didn't recognize the voice, but the message sent a deep primal shudder through him. This was not a distress call, not a warning. This was a game. With a sharp inhale, he forced himself to regain control. Silence that transmission, he roared. Varish lunged for the manual override. But the moment his claws touched the interface, the lights cut out again. Total darkness. Then, the screaming began. A predator unleashed. The first scream came from Deck 47. A chilling, guttural sound. Half panic, half something else. Something wrong. It was followed by a static burst in the comms. Then, a whisper. Low, just beneath the static. A single word, almost playful. Run. Then another scream. This time from Deck 38. Corvellis turned to his security chief, an older veteran named Telresh. Deploy containment teams, the Admiral ordered. Find whatever this is. Kill it. Telresh nodded sharply and activated his communicator, only to freeze mid-motion. His display had changed. It was no longer showing the security status. Instead, a live feed. The bridge fell silent as they stared at the grainy footage. Deck 47. The corridor was dimly lit, flickering overhead lights struggling against an unnatural darkness that clung to the walls like mist. Then, a shadow, moving. Slow, deliberate, not crawling, walking. 2 legs, humanoid, but wrong. Too fluid, too distorted. Corvellis watched as one of his officers, a low-ranking engineer, emerged from the shadows. Only, something was off. His body twitched, his limbs moving in an unnatural, jerking rhythm. His mandibles twitched open, as if he were choking on air. Then, his neck snapped backward, his head turning far too much. His jaw opened. And then, he laughed. Not a normal laugh. Not his laugh. A human laugh. Corvellis' claws dug into the console. This was impossible. What in the void is happening? Varish whispered. Corvellis had no answer. Then the screen glitched again. For a split second, between the static bursts, a face appeared. Not Vera. Not machine. Human. But its eyes. They were wrong. They weren't glowing with anger, or hatred, or fear. They were smiling, mocking. Then the voice returned. Soft, amused. You still don't understand, do you? A pause. And then, we're already here. The fall of the Zathal begins. Alarms screamed through the ship. Corvellis barely had time to react before multiple red alerts flared across the bridge. Intrusions detected on every level. Systems were being overwritten at an impossible speed. Security doors locked and unlocked randomly, trapping some officers while exposing others to the ever-encroaching darkness threading through the decks. This isn't a battle, Varish murmured. He turned to his admiral, eyes wide with understanding. This is an infection. Corvellis knew it too. The humans had never fought the Dominion on the nightmare unfolds. Admiral Corvellis gripped the edge of his command console, his mandibles tightening as he forced himself to breathe. The bridge of the Zathal, once a beacon of strategic dominance, had turned into a tomb of silence. Every officer stood frozen, their eyes locked on the static-ridden display before them. The intruder, whatever it was, had already reached the lower decks. Corvellis knew fear. He had witnessed the fall of entire civilizations. He had crushed revolts with precision. He had seen worlds burn. But this was something different. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. The screen flickered again, showing a corridor on deck 32. The security feeds were barely functioning, their images fractured by digital interference. But something was moving. A Vera officer, sprinting. His body tensed, his mandibles clicking furiously as he bolted down the dim corridor, his claws scraping against the metal flooring. He was breathing too fast, running too slow. The lights above him flickered wildly. His shadow twisted and stretched unnaturally behind him. Then, the lights went out. For 3 agonizing seconds, the screen was pitch black. Then, static burst across the feed, and the officer was gone, vanished. No body, no sound, nothing. Only a flickering pool of dark liquid left where he had stood. Then came the whisper again, not from the comms, from the walls. One by one, Corvellis snapped his head toward his second-in-command. Varish stood rigid, his exoskeletal fingers hovering over his console, as if hesitant to touch it. "They're not just inside our systems," Varish whispered. "They're inside our ship." Corvellis turned to Telresh, his veteran security chief. "We need a countermeasure," the admiral said, forcing the sharp edge back into his voice. "If this thing is biological, we burn it out. If it's digital, we cut it off from the mainframe." Telresh didn't answer immediately, because he knew this wasn't biological. This wasn't digital. This was something worse. Still, he straightened his stance and nodded, forcing a command into his communicator. "Deploying containment teams. Section off the lower decks. Activate full lockdown protocol." His fingers hovered over the manual override, only for the lights to flicker violently the moment he made contact. Then, every door on the bridge sealed shut. Corvellis spun toward the main console. "Who authorized?" Then, the bridge lights failed. The darkness moves. For 5 full seconds, the bridge of the Jethal was plunged into total blackness. Not dim, not disrupted. Absolute, suffocating darkness. And in that void, something moved. A sound, not quite footsteps, not quite a whisper. A low, scraping noise, like claws against metal, moving between them. Corvellis heard someone breathe sharply. Someone moved too fast. Then, the lights flickered back on. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't. Because now, one of them was missing. A single officer, Jarek Tull, who had been standing near the comms console just seconds ago, was gone. No sound, no struggle. Just gone. Corvellis' claws curled into fists. Then he noticed something far worse. Jarek's console, where he had been standing, was still active. And the screen was *** typing on its own.